Okay, this is lesson 6.10, and I'm looking at problem number 16. You have this long line segment to measure, and they ask you some different questions. And they tell you that 1/4 of an inch is equal to 4 miles. Now remember, we're going to make proportions, so it might be easier to write this as 0.25 inches equal 4 miles if you don't want to have to mess with fractions. They ask us how many miles are there from point A to point B. Well, here's A, here's B. And if you measure that, you end up getting 2 inches. Well, in order to figure out how long that is, we could do this. We could make a proportion, and we can use the decimal if we want to, but remember, we have to make a proportion is 2 fractions. One fraction is going to be the scale that they give us right up here, and I'll circle it in a color and write it. I'm going to put inches on the top, and I'm going to put miles on the bottom, and I'm just reminding myself with this out to the side. But the part that I'm actually going to write in my fraction are those numbers. I could put 1/4 over 4 because it's 1/4 inch equal 4 miles. I'm going to write it as 0.25 on this example just because you can do that, and then you can use your calculator. Maybe it'll make it a little easier. So that's the scale. Now, I'm looking at my segment over here. I'm going to write segment at the top of this other one. The second fraction I'm going to make and set equal to the first fraction because that's what we can do with the proportion. We can say if 1/4 an inch is 4 miles, how many miles is 2 inches? If you remember, I put inches on top, so on the segment I measured 2 inches. So it goes with the top because on both of our fractions we're going to put the top as inches and the bottom as miles. We don't know how many miles that is, so we're going to put an X there since that's missing. And what we're going to do to solve it now is to cross multiply. We're going to say, first let's do this diagonal. 4 times 2 is 8. And I'll just go ahead and show my work here so you know where I'm getting things. And then I'm going to put an equal sign. And I'm going to go over here and do the other diagonal. 0.25 times x would be 0.25x, or you might have 1/4 of an x if you put 1/4 up there. I'm just going to use decimals because so many of you were struggling. Now, I have my equation, a equal 0.25x, and I need to solve for x. X is multiplied by 0.25. The opposite of multiplying by 0.25 is dividing by 0.25, and the reason I do the opposite is I want to get this 0.25 over here with this x to cancel out. 0.25 goes into 0.25 one time, 0.25 goes into 0.25 one time, so 1 over 1 is 1x, and usually we just write x. That's just what lazy mathematicians do, right? They write 1x as x. Now, 8 divided by 0.25 would be, let's see, 32. You could do that on your calculator, but you get 32. So the answer from A to B is x equal 32 miles. Now, if you continue on to 17, what you're going to do is measure from B to C, C to D, add all that up, and we'll do that quickly. I'm going to try to leave room to go back and do 9 because I see it's got fractions, and that seems to be causing people a lot of work. Measure from, you got B to C, and then you got C to D. If you measure from B to C, you get 1 inch. I can't show that, but you can measure on your own. And here you get 1 1/4 inch. So now, I could find these separately and add them together, but if I want to know that total miles, remember we're going to drive on the road. We're going to pretend this is a road, and we're going to drive on the road. We're not going to try to cut across or anything. 1 inch plus 1 1/4 inch would be 2 1/4 inches, which I could write as 2.25 inches if I want to do this in decimals. All right, so I'm going to, again, remember we had a scale, and the scale was 1/4 of an inch is equal to 4 miles. So again, just to kind of keep the fractions out of this discussion so you understand the ideas, I'm going to change that to 1/4 is 0.25. You can divide 4 into 1 and get 0.25. So I'm going to use this as my scale here. So what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to say, okay, let's solve this. Let's make a proportion so that we can solve this. And I'm going to put my scale, I'm going to put inches on top and miles on bottom just because if I read it, it just comes that way. I could have done it in reverse if I'd wanted to. 0.25 inches equal to 4 miles. So if you remember, we measured over here, And on the top, we're supposed to put inches, and I measured and totaled up everything. It was 2.25 inches, and they want to know how many miles is that. So to solve this, what we can do is cross multiply. 4 times 2.25 is 9, and then I have 0.25 times x that I get from this diagonal. We set those two amounts equal to each other, and we solve for x. To get x by itself, I'm going to divide by what's in front of it. Since I put a decimal, that's what I'm going to do. If I divide 9 by 0.25, if you put that in your calculator, you end up getting 36. So the distance from B to D is 36 miles. One last problem. We'll look at number 9. 1/2 of an inch equals to 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to do this one in fractions just so we can see that that we can do it, okay, with fractions. This, if you measure it, it's 1 inch, and over here this is 1 inch, and this is 1 inch. So if I let's write this is our scale up here. In our scale, we have inches and inches, which is going to be kind of hard. We're going to have to keep this straight. 1/2 of an inch, I'm going to put this one on top and this one on bottom, and over 1/8 is equal to, now when we measured this triangle, all the sides measured the same, so I only have to do one proportion here to solve it. When I measured, remember the measured part, this is my scale. This is the part that's actually on the paper. This is what it's equal to. This is what I would be measuring, this first one. When I measured, I got 1 inch. Okay, so I could call, what is it in reality? X. And now we can cross multiply. 1/2 times x is 1/2 x. And then on the other side of this, 1 times 1/8 is 1/8. If I want to solve both sides, how do I get rid of a fraction when it's multiplied by a variable? I could divide both sides by that 1/2 that's in front of this x right here, but that gets really messy. So what we learned that we can do is to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of the fraction. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 2 over 1. I'm talking about the fraction that's in front of this x. The reason we do that is everything cancels out and leaves me with 1 over 1x, which is just 1x, and we write x. And then we have, on the other side, 1 times 2 is 2. 8 times 1 is 8. 2 over 8 actually reduces to 1/4. So what does that tell me? That each one of these things, when I measured them, they were an inch, but because of my scale factor, that actually represents 1/4 of an inch on each side. So the answer for each of those sides ends up being that 1 inch you measure is equal to 1/4 of an inch.